come back to whispers in the dark. Tonight, I have a story for you that smells of salt, rot, wet earth, and blood. It is a tale of an island cut off from mercy, of old faith turned savage, of a family secret dragged screaming out of the dark. Settle in, turn the lights low, and let the wind outside become part of the telling. This is a story about what waits for desperate people when they sail too far from the world and find a place that was never meant to be found. The sea was black when Rowan Vane first saw the island, not the soft black of velvet night, nor the deep blue black of calm water under moonlight. This was the color of a wound after it clots, a hard, breathless darkness that seemed to swallow the stars and leave only a faint, cold smear of light along the horizon. Rowan stood at the bow of the fishing launch with one hand clenched around the wet rail and the other tucked inside his coat, his fingers pressed to the folded letter that had drawn him out there. His sister had been taken. That was what the letter said. Not missing, not gone, not lost. Taken. Taken by men who spoke of revelation and sacrifice. Taken to an island where the law was prayer and the prayer was fear. He had read the letter so many times, the paper had gone soft at the creases. Each time he unfolded it, he expected the words to have changed. Expected them to reveal some mercy he had missed. Instead, they remained the same, written in a frantic hand. Each line dragged across the page, as if the writer had been listening for footsteps outside the door. Your sister is alive for now. They mean to trade her life for coin. Come alone. Bring money. Do not trust the elders. Do not let them take you below the soil. Below the soil. He had not been able to forget that phrase. The fisherman steering the launch had not spoken more than a dozen words since they left the mainland. He was a gaunt man with cheeks hollowed by weather and hunger. And every time the lantern swung it, seemed to carve new lines into his face. He kept glancing toward the island with the same expression a man might wear while watching a coffin sink into the sea. When the shape of land finally rose from the dark, Rowan felt his stomach tighten. The island was little more than a black mass at first, a hump of stone and forest. But as they drew nearer, details began to emerge. A cliff face ran along the eastern side, jagged as broken teeth. Above it loomed a forest of pine and twisted ash, trunks packed tightly together like the bars of a cage. Higher still stood a ridge with a small village crouched beneath it, its houses squat and roofed with sod, as though they had not been built upon the land, but forced halfway into it. A narrow jetty stabbed into the water. Lanterns burned at its end, weak yellow eyes in the mist. The fisherman slowed the launch and spat into the sea. This is close enough. Rowan turned to him. The letter said the dock. The dock belongs to them, and I paid you to take me there. The fisherman gripped the tiller harder. You paid me to get you to the island. I have done that. He looked at Rowan then, properly looked at him. And what Rowan saw in the man's gaze was not greed, not indifference, but terror old enough to have settled into the bones. Listen to me, the fisherman said. "Whatever you think waits up there, it is worse." The people on that island did not come from nowhere. They were driven there. Outcasts, heretics, men who wanted a god they could touch and cut and bleed. There were stories once. Animals born wrong, children who never spoke, crops that grew fat one year and black the next. Folk said the island itself was sick. Then those people went there and made a bargain with the sickness. Rowan stepped toward him. "My sister is there." The fisherman lowered his eyes. "Then may God keep her, because the thing on that island will not." Before Rowan could answer, the man shoved a small rowboat loose, almost frantic to be rid of him. Rowan climbed down with his case of money, his boots slipping on the wet wood, and the fisherman pushed off before he had even shipped the oars. The launch turned in the dark and retreated into the mist so fast it seemed less like departure and more like flight. Alone on the water, Rowan rowed toward the jetty. By the time he reached it, a fine rain had begun to fall. Not enough to soak him, just enough to lay a cold sheen over everything. The ropes on the dock were slimy with algae. The planks gave under his weight with a sound like old bones moving in a grave. No one came to greet him, yet he felt watched from the moment he set foot on the island. There were signs of life everywhere and nowhere. A gull nailed to a post with its wings spread wide. A wagon half sunk in mud, its wheels furred with moss. Smoke leaking from the chimney of a hut near the shore. Somewhere farther inland, a bell rang once, low and cracked. Rowan lifted his case and followed the path uphill. The village revealed itself slowly through the trees and rain, as if reluctant to be seen. The houses were small and mean, their walls built of stone and weathered timber, their windows covered not by glass, but by stretched hide or old cloth. Gardens squatted beside them, though at first glance Rowan could not tell what grew there. The plants were too dark, too thick in the leaf, and seemed to glisten wetly, even where the rain had not touched them. People emerged as he walked. Not many. A woman carrying a bucket who stopped dead when she saw him. An old man splitting wood who lowered his axe and stared. 3 children barefoot in the mud, their faces blank and pale as tallow. No one spoke. No one smiled. They simply watched him pass as though he were not a guest, but a corpse being carried to burial. At the center of the settlement stood a meeting hall larger than the rest, built of rough stone and crowned with a steep roof covered in dead reeds. Beside it rose a bell tower warped by years of damp wind. The bell within was green with age, and Rowan noticed dark streaks staining the stone beneath it, as if something had dripped there over and over again. The hall doors opened before he reached them. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered and neatly dressed in plain dark clothes that looked almost civilized compared to the village around him. His beard was trimmed. His hair was oiled and combed back. In another life, he might have passed for a merchant or a minor politician. Here, under that crooked bell and that sky, he looked like an undertaker pretending to be a priest. "You have come for the girl," he said. Rowan stopped. "My sister." "Of course." The man's voice was calm and polished, but there was something coldly pleased beneath it, as though a long-expected game had finally begun. "I am Gideon Vale," he said. "You may think of me as the steward of this island. I want to see her, and you shall, once we have settled the matter that brought you here." Gideon's gaze drifted to the case in Rowan's hand, then back to his face. "You understand, I hope, that your sister entered into our protection under complicated circumstances. There are mouths to feed here, repairs to make, storms to survive. We are not an uncharitable people, but neither can we be expected to bear the burden of strangers without compensation." Rowan stepped closer until rain dripped off the brim of his hat onto Gideon's boots. "Let me see her now." For a moment, neither man moved. Then Gideon smiled a thin and bloodless smile and gestured inside. Hall smelled of smoke, damp wool, and something sweeter that Rowan could not place at first. As he followed Gideon in, he realized it was the smell of spoiled fruit beginning to ferment. Benches lined the room in strict rows, all facing a raised wooden platform at the far end, where a tall chair sat beneath a carving of roots twisting around a woman's face. The carving was crude, but the details were terrible. The wooden face had no eyes, only hollow pits. Its mouth was open in either a scream or a prayer. Roots entered the mouth and emerged from the cheeks and forehead, as though the head itself were being used as soil. Several people waited inside. An old woman wrapped in dark shawls, whose hands were brown with earth under the nails. A young man with a scar so deep it pulled one corner of his mouth permanently downward. Another elder whose face was almost hidden by a white beard that reached the middle of his chest. They stood in silence until Gideon introduced them, though Rowan scarcely heard the names. All he cared about was the figure tied to a chair near the hearth. Andrea. Her hair was shorter than when he had last seen her, hacked bluntly at the jaw. Her dress was stained with mud and ash. One side of her face was bruised purple and yellow, and her wrists were raw where the rope cut them. But she was alive. When she lifted her head and saw Rowan, a sound came out of her that was half sob, half laugh. He crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt?" "They beat one of the others to frighten me," she whispered. "They said they would start on my fingers if you did not come." Her lips trembled. She looked thinner, harder somehow, as if fear had already burned away something soft inside her. "I brought the money," Rowan said. "You are leaving with me." A dry chuckle rose from the old woman by the hearth. "Leaving," she murmured, as though the word itself were absurd. Rowan stood and turned. "Untie her." Gideon remained by the door, still composed, still almost pleasant. "Once payment is confirmed." Rowan snapped open the case and turned it toward them. Bundles of notes lay inside, damp at the edges from the sea air. The elders stared, but not with simple greed. Their expressions were more desperate than that. more ravenous. Gideon took one bundle, thumbed the notes, and gave a small nod. Yet no one moved to free Andrea. What now? Gideon's fingers lingered on the money. Now we discuss the inconvenience. What inconvenience? The island is not in a healthy state, said the bearded elder suddenly, his voice creaking like a door long shut. The animals miscarry. The hens lay soft, shelled eggs. The ground is hungry and gives less with each season. The old woman turned her soil-stained hands over one another, as if washing them in memory. The mother is displeased. Rowan felt Andrea go rigid behind him. Gideon sighed, almost weary. Our people have old obligations. Your sister arrived during a period of spiritual unrest. Some interpreted her appearance as providence, others as temptation. Her continued presence has become divisive. Rowan stared at him. I do not care about your quarrels. You should, Andrea whispered. He looked back at her. She would not meet his eyes. She was staring at the carved woman above the platform, her face drawn tight. They took me below the chapel, she said. There are tunnels, caves. They made me watch. The old woman hissed softly, offended. Gideon's expression hardened for the first time. Enough, but Andrea kept speaking, the words tumbling out in a fever. There is something under the island, not a god, not anything holy. They keep it buried in roots and chains and prayers, and they cut it to feed the fields. They cut it, and it screams like a person. Silence followed. Rain tapped against the roof. Somewhere within the walls water trickled, thin and steady. Gideon smiled again, but now it looked dangerous. Your sister has been frightened. We all say unfortunate things when frightened. Rowan stepped between him and Andrea. Untie her. Instead, Gideon nodded to the scarred young man. Everything happened too fast. The young man lunged. Rowan swung the empty case into his face and heard cartilage break. The old woman shrieked. One of the elders seized Andrea's chair. Gideon moved with startling speed, producing a knife from inside his coat and pressing it to Rowan's throat. Enough, Gideon said, very softly. The room froze. The blade was thin and sharp enough that Rowan could feel its kiss before the pain. A bead of blood rolled down his neck into his collar. Gideon leaned close, and the sweet smell from earlier was stronger on him. The same scent of overripe fruit, now laced with copper. You have come a long way, Gideon murmured. Do not make yourself useless before the true negotiations begin. Rowan's breathing slowed. Behind Gideon's shoulder, he could see Andrea shaking, and behind her the carved woman with roots spilling from her face. This is the negotiation, Rowan said. Take the money, release her. Gideon held his gaze another long moment, then drew back. Very well. You will both have quarters for the night. The sea is too rough to leave before dawn. That was not the agreement. No, Gideon said, but it is the reality. He motioned toward the scarred young man, whose nose was pouring blood down his shirt. Show them to the guest house. The building where they were taken stood at the edge of the village, near the tree line. It had once been a farmhouse, perhaps, but time and neglect had made it sag inward. The floor sloped. The shutters hung crooked. The single room assigned to them contained 2 narrow beds stuffed with straw, a wash basin stained orange with rust, and a stove that gave little heat. Once the door shut and the bolt slammed outside, Andrea grabbed Rowan's wrist so hard her nails bit through his sleeve. We have to go now. They said dawn. They will not let us reach dawn. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes burned feverishly. She told him in bursts, packing the room while rain crawled down the walls and mice rustled in the straw. She had been traveling with a man from the mainland, a would-be convert to the island faith, greedy for secrets and profit. He had arranged passage in hopes of trading with them, of taking what they worshipped and turning it into gold. But once on the island, things had turned wrong. The man had tried to bargain beyond his place. The islanders had seized them both. He had been killed. Andrea had been kept. Why keep you? Rowan asked. Andrea stopped packing. Because their god is failing. The candle flame in the room bent as a draft passed through. They call it the mother, but it is not a mother. It is a prisoner. They keep it deep underground in a chamber made of roots and stone. I saw it only once, and that was enough. It looked almost human from a distance. A woman's shape tangled in the walls. But the closer you get, the less human it is. Skin like bark soaked in milk, bones too long, limbs bent wrong, and its face. She shut her eyes. I could not tell where the face ended and the roots began. They bring it offerings. Blood, milk, bits of animals. They carve pieces from it and bury them in the fields. When it is strong, the island thrives. When it suffers, the island rots. Rowan listened without interrupting. He had spent enough years among broken men and stranger tailies to know when fear made liars, and when it only stripped away denial. Andrea was not lying. He could hear the truth in her voice, raw as exposed nerve. Gideon wants control, she said. The old ones serve the mother out of fear. But Gideon thinks the island can survive without the old rites. He has been starving the thing, beating it, trying to bend it to his will. Others want sacrifice to appease it. Human sacrifice. Her eyes met his. They argued over me. The room seemed to shrink around them. Outside, the bell rang again, once, twice, then stopped. Rowan went to the window and eased the cloth curtain aside. The village below glimmered with scattered lanterns. Figures moved between the houses carrying bundles. Near the hall, several men dragged what looked like a hog carcass by the hind legs, leaving a dark streak through the mud. We leave through the trees, he said. Andrea shook her head. There are traps, pits, and they patrol the shore. We need a boat. Then we steal one. She almost laughed. And the sound was terrible because it held no amusement. Only the last shreds of reason scraping against panic. You still think these are ordinary people? A sound interrupted her. A scrape from beneath the floorboards. Both of them froze. Then came another sound. Wet, slow, like fingernails being drawn through mud. Rowan crouched and pressed his ear to the floor. Breathing. Someone beneath the room was breathing. He rose without a word, took the poker from beside the stove, and jabbed it between two floorboards. Something below gave a small, startled gasp, then scuttled away through the darkness. Andrea covered her mouth. What was that? He looked toward the door. A warning. They did not wait longer. Rowan forced the latch with the poker until the rusted staple tore from the wood. They slipped into the rain and circled behind the house, staying low beneath the leaning shadow of the wall. The air smelled of wet leaves and sheep dung and distant smoke. At first the village seemed asleep. Then they heard singing. It drifted from the hall, a low chant carried on many voices, too deep to be a hymn and too hollow to be a celebration. There was no melody in it, only repetition, only the pounding rhythm of words meant to wear away thought and leave obedience behind. Andrea flinched. They are gathering. They moved uphill along a ditch choked with weeds until they reached the back of the meeting hall. Light spilled from cracks in the boards, and through one narrow gap, Rowan glimpsed the congregation inside. Men and women knelt shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed, while the old woman stood on the platform with a bowl cradled in both hands. Gideon was absent. The bowl steamed. As Rowan watched, she dipped her fingers into it and smeared something across the forehead of the nearest child. The child did not react. One by one, the villagers came forward and received the same mark. Blood, Rowan whispered. Andrea shook her head. Worse. A sound came from the trees behind them. Branches shifting. Footsteps. They ran. The forest swallowed them within seconds. The path vanished beneath pine needles and roots slick with moss. Rain dripped from the canopy in cold, fat drops. Thorns clawed at their coats. Behind them, voices rose, shouting now, no longer chanting. Torches flashed between trunks. Rowan seized Andrea's hand and dragged her downslope, trusting gravity where he could not trust sight. The earth grew softer underfoot. Twice he nearly fell. Once his boot sank ankle deep into something that was not mud, but a mass of vegetable rot, so warm it felt alive. The shouting spread through the trees. Then Andrea screamed. The ground beneath her gave way. She vanished with a crack of branches and a rush of loose soil. Rowan dropped flat and caught her arm before she could fall further. Beneath her, sharpened stakes rose from a pit hidden under leaves and woven reeds. One had already ripped through her skirt and scored a red line up her calf. Grunting with effort, Rowan hauled her back onto solid ground, just as torchlight flared through the pines less than 30 yards away. They crawled on their bellies through ferns until they reached a boulder half swallowed by roots. There they lay pressed to the earth, while 3 islanders passed close enough for Rowan to smell the sour ale on them. One carried a hunting spear. Another had an iron hook. The third dragged a dog by a rope, though the animal did not bark. It whined softly, belly low, trying to pull away from the woods ahead. When they had gone, Andrea whispered, "The shore is east." Rowan listened to the sea somewhere beyond the trees, a dull pounding against rock. They moved again, slower now, until the forest thinned and the smell of salt strengthened. Then the ground leveled and opened onto a cliff path slick with rain. Below, waves smashed themselves white against stone. No beach, no cove, no boat. Across the cliffside, lanterns bobbed where searchers spread out like ants. Andrea's breath hitched. "We are trapped." Before Rowan could answer, a voice spoke from the dark behind them. "Not yet." They turned as one. A man stepped from the shadows of an overhanging yew, hands raised. He was perhaps 40, though misery had aged him past certainty. His clothes were those of the island, but torn and filthy. One eye was clouded. The other glittered sharp and frightened in the lantern light creeping through the trees. "I know a way," he said, "if you trust me." "No," Andrea whispered at once. But Rowan studied the man. There was blood on his cuffs, old and black. His nails were split. Around his neck hung a crude talisman of twine and little finger bones. "Why help us?" The man swallowed. "Because I helped put her in the ground." Silence rushed in around those words. "My daughter," he said. "They said the mother was hungry. The harvest had failed. Gideon said blood was needed to quicken the roots. They told us all it was mercy, an honor. They dug the pit before sunrise. I held her while she cried, and they sang. When the earth closed over her face, I could still hear her under the soil." His mouth trembled, but no tears came. Men like that had long since run dry. "I have heard children beneath the ground ever since," he said. "Sometimes in dreams, sometimes waking. So no, I will not let them bury another innocent if I can help it." Andrea stared at him with naked horror. "There are tunnels under the chapel," the man went on. "Old mine shafts widened into passages. They lead to the chamber of the mother and to the goat pens beyond. From there is a path to the western cove. A skiff is hidden there. Gideon keeps it for himself." Rowan nodded once. "Take us." They followed the stranger, whose name was Silas, back through the forest by ways impossible to track. He moved like a man who had spent his life learning where not to step. The path brought them to a low stone structure, half hidden under ivy, on the far side of the village. In the darkness, Rowan had mistaken it for a storehouse, but as they neared, he saw the crude cross above the door and the fresh gouges in the threshold, as if many heavy things had been dragged in and out. The chapel was empty. Rows of narrow pews faced a simple altar draped in stained white cloth. Candles guttered at its base. Behind the altar hung not a cross, but a woven shape of roots tied into a rough circle. And within that circle, a small bundle wrapped in linen. Flies crawled over it. Silas went to a side wall and pulled a bench aside, revealing an iron ring set into the floor. When he lifted it, a trapdoor rose on shrieking hinges, and a draught of foul air washed up from below. It smelled of wet clay, old blood, mushrooms, decay. Andrea recoiled. I cannot. Rowan took her shoulders. You can. Silas lit a lantern and descended first. The tunnel beneath the chapel was older than the village above. Its walls were rough cut stone, mottled with mineral stains that gleamed in the lantern light like grease. Roots punched through the ceiling in tangled knots. Water dripped steadily somewhere out of sight. The floor sloped deeper with every step, and soon the air grew warm, close, and strangely sweet. There were sounds down there, creaking timbers, the shift of distant chains, a low thrumming as if a giant heart beat very slowly somewhere inside the earth. They passed side chambers cut into the rock. In one lay stacks of sacks split open to reveal grain gone moldy and crawling with pale beetles. In another stood shelves of jars filled with murky liquid. Shapes floated inside them. Lambs with two heads, hairless things like unborn pigs. One jar contained what looked horribly like a human infant, with roots wound through the empty sockets of its eyes. Andrea turned away retching. Silas whispered, They keep the signs of favor and disfavor, proof of the mother's power. Further on they found cages, not all of them empty. In one crouched a woman with her hair fallen over her face, muttering to herself. In another lay a man whose legs had been broken and set wrong, the bones jutting under the skin like white knuckles. He stared at them with such blank ruin that Rowan could not tell whether he understood they were there. Other cages held only old straw, crusted filth, and smears on the walls where hands had clawed until the nails tore away. What is this place? Rowan breathed. Silas did not answer. The tunnel ended at a pair of doors made from thick planks banded in rusted iron. Beyond them, the throbbing sound deepened, joined now by something else. Whimpering, not human, not animal, something between. Silas pushed one door open a crack. The chamber beyond was vast, much larger than the chapel above could have suggested. Rowan felt at once that the cave had not been carved by men alone. Stone pillars rose like the ribs of some buried beast. Roots wrapped everything, thick as ship ropes, descending from cracks high overhead and diving into the floor where black water pooled around them. In the center of the chamber stood a mound of earth and root shaped almost like a throne, and upon it hung the thing the island called Mother. At first Rowan understood only fragments, a shoulder too narrow and too long, a ribcage visible beneath skin that looked both human and vegetal, pale and lined with green veins. Arms stretched outward and bound in living roots that had grown around them like shackles. Legs fused partly into the mound, or perhaps swallowed by it. The head bowed forward beneath a crown of tangled tendrils and wet black hair. Then it lifted its face. Rowan nearly stumbled back. The face was female in the broad arrangement of brow and cheek and mouth, but wrong in every other regard. The eyes were milky and enormous. The pupils spread like ink in water. The mouth was torn wider than any human mouth could open, not as an injury, but as a condition of being. Rootlets twitched at the corners of the lips. Where tears should have been, there was sap, thick and amber, running down the cheeks. Its chest rose and fell in ragged jerks. Each breath seemed to pain it. All around the chamber, offerings hung from the roots. Dead birds, strips of meat, little bundles of hair and teeth. Clay bowls filled with milk turned pink by blood. The floor was carved with channels leading away from the mound, and those channels were black with old stains. Andrea's fingers found Rowan's sleeve and dug in. That is what they feed the island with. The creature turned its head toward them. Its lips moved. The voice that emerged was a whisper of many voices together, like dry leaves dragged across stone. Help! Then bells erupted overhead, loud, frantic, impossible to mistake. Someone had found the open trapdoor. Silas cursed under his breath. They know. The mother began to writhe, every movement setting the roots around it shivering. A sound escaped it, thin at first, then rising into a keening cry that filled the chamber and seemed to vibrate inside Rowan's teeth. From passages beyond came answering shouts. Gideon entered through the far archway with 6 men behind him, all carrying torches and blades. He stopped when he saw Rowan beside the open door, and for the first time, the smooth certainty left his face. You should have taken the money and gone quietly, he said. Rowan looked from Gideon to the thing on the mound. This is what you built your faith on. Gideon's expression twisted. Faith? No. This island was starving when my father found it. The old men and women here knelt to roots and mud and begged a monster for bread. It answered, yes, but every gift had a price. More blood, more submission, more fear. I learned the truth they would not see. It is no goddess. It is an animal, a breeding sack of miracles. And like any animal, it can be managed. The mother made a wet, choking sound, as if in response. Gideon went on, louder now, for his people as much as for Rowan. They would crawl forever before this thing. They would bury their children and call it holy. I will not. I will take what power it has and cut away the superstition. The old woman from the hall appeared behind him, hair unbound and streaming, her face transformed by fury. You starved her, she shrieked. You made the fields die. You made the wombs empty. Her pain is in the roots now. Her anger is in the rain. Gideon spun on her. Your devotion is what made us slaves. While they shouted, Silas edged toward one of the channels cut into the floor. Rowan saw his intention too late. With a cry that was half prayer and half rage, Silas plunged his hands into the black water and dragged free a hooked blade used perhaps for harvest, perhaps for butchery. He rushed Gideon. The hook sank into one of Gideon's men instead, tearing open the man's throat in a spray so hot. And sudden Rowan smelled it before he fully saw it. The man collapsed, clutching at himself, while blood pumped through his fingers in thick, bright ropes. Then chaos broke loose. Villagers surged into the chamber from both passages. Torches fell. Smoke rolled along the ceiling. The mother screamed louder, and roots began to convulse across the floor like snakes waking. Rowan shoved Andrea behind a stone pillar and caught a charging islander in the chest with the poker he still carried. The iron punched through cloth, flesh, and something soft beneath, and the man folded around it with a noise like air leaving a bellows. Beside the mound, the old woman climbed onto the roots and slashed her own palm over a bowl, letting blood rain onto the mother's face. The creature's milky eyes snapped wide. A tremor ran through the entire chamber. Gideon seized the old woman by the hair and dragged her backward. Before he could throw her clear, a root as thick as a thigh burst from the floor and speared through her abdomen. For an instant, she hung there still alive, mouth working soundlessly. Then the root lifted her higher and split her open from groin to breastbone with a slow, obscene rip. Her entrails spilled steaming into the black water below. Andrea screamed. The sight sent the villagers into a frenzy. Some fell to their knees in worship. Others tried to flee. Roots erupted everywhere now, punching through stone, coiling around ankles, snapping with the force of traps. Silas reached Gideon at last and drove the hooked blade into his side. Gideon staggered, snarled, and plunged his knife up under Silas's jaw. The point emerged through the roof of Silas's mouth. He spasmed once and fell twitching, blood spilling darkly down his chest. Gideon ripped the blade free and turned just as Rowan crashed into him. They slammed against the mound. The mother writhed above them, showering them with sap and flecks of damp earth. Gideon fought like a cornered dog, vicious and fast. He punched the wound in Rowan's neck. He drove a knee into his stomach. Rowan caught Gideon's knife wrist and bent it back until the tendons stood out like cords. But Gideon only laughed through bloodied teeth. "You came for family," he hissed. "So did I." Then he headbutted Rowan hard enough to burst light behind his eyes. Across the chamber, Andrea was struggling with one of the villagers. The man had both hands around her throat and was forcing her toward a root that pulsed as if hungry. Rowan tried to reach her, but Gideon dragged him down. They rolled into one of the blood channels. Black clotted sludge smeared over them both. The mother's face descended suddenly close to Rowan's own. He could smell it. Not rot, not exactly. More like green things crushed underfoot. Fresh cut stems, rain in soil. The scent of life forced into the wrong shape. Its torn mouth opened, and it whispered. Whether it meant Gideon or itself, Rowan could not tell. Gideon saw the movement too, and for the first time fear showed plainly on him. He scrambled backward, slipping in blood. Rowan lunged, caught his coat, and drove him against the mound. Roots instantly seized Gideon's arms. He bellowed and hacked at them with the knife, sawing through fibers that bled pale sap. Another root whipped around his chest, another around his thigh. Rowan stumbled away as the mound seemed to wake beneath Gideon, opening in places like flesh torn apart to reveal woven masses of root beneath. Gideon screamed curses, threats, prayers, every kind of appeal men make when control leaves them. The mother lowered its face until it touched his. Then the roots pulled. Gideon's left arm came away first, not cleanly. The shoulder stretched impossibly far before the joint burst with a wet, cracking pop, and the arm tore free in a flood of blood. Gideon's scream became something beyond human. The roots did not stop. They wrapped his remaining limbs and began to draw them apart, slowly, carefully, as if savoring the geometry of his destruction. His ribs split through the skin one by one. The belly opened. Loops of gut spilled out and tangled in the roots like steaming ropes. His jaw tore loose at one side. One eye burst. Still he lived, shrieking, until the roots pulled his head backward far enough to snap the spine. The sound that followed was almost worse. Not the wet rupture of the body finally giving way. Not the slap of meat falling into water, but the sudden silence after. Andrea crawled to Rowan, coughing, and seized his arm. "We have to go now." The chamber was collapsing into madness. Torches had set several hanging offerings alight, and greasy smoke filled the air. The villagers who survived were either fleeing or throwing themselves at the mound in ecstasy and terror. The mother convulsed, each movement more violent than the last. Cracks raced through the stone floor. Rowan looked at it, at the roots binding it, at the raw places where Gideon had cut it, where the old woman had fed it, where generations had taken and taken and taken. He understood then what it had asked. And near the mound lay Gideon's dropped lantern, its glass broken, but the flame still alive in a puddle of oil. Rowan snatched it up and climbed the roots while Andrea shouted his name. Heat licked his hand. The mother watched him with those drowning white eyes. "I am sorry," he said, though he did not know if it could understand the words. He thrust the flame deep into the dry, inner mass of roots, where sap glistened. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then fire ran. It shot upward through the mound, bright and hungry, feeding on oil, on resin, on decades of dried offering and ancient wood. The mother threw back its head and released a cry so vast the chamber itself seemed to recoil. Flames spread through the roots binding its arms. Smoke poured from its mouth. Rowan jumped clear and landed badly, pain flaring up his leg. Andrea dragged him to his feet. Together, they ran toward the tunnel leading to the goat pens as the fire climbed higher, turning the cave walls hellish gold. Behind them, the mother screamed and screamed. The goat pens were empty, except for bones. Thousands of them, it seemed, piled in drifts against the walls. Skulls cracked open. Ribs gnawed clean, tiny hooves. The smell was appalling, an ammoniac stench layered over old blood. But beyond the pens, a fresh draft blew through a narrow passage, and at the end of it, they saw gray dawn bleeding into the sky. They emerged on the western side of the island, just as the first true light touched the sea. The cove was small and steep-sided, almost hidden from above. A skiff rocked there on a tether, half full of rainwater. Rowan and Andrea scrambled down the rocks, slipping, bruising themselves, but neither looked back until they had shoved the boat into the surf and clambered in. Only then did they see the island. Smoke was rising from the ridge, not just from one place, but from many. Through the trees and over the rooftops, shapes moved in frantic confusion. Bells clanged without rhythm. A section of hillside near the village shuddered and collapsed inward, as if the earth had opened its mouth at last. Rowan rowed. Every pull of the oars sent agony through his arms, but he rowed. Andrea belayed water with a broken board, her hands slick with blood that might have been hers, his, or someone else. The sea fought them at first, pushing them sideways against the rocks, but then a current caught the skiff and drew it outward. The island receded. Smoke thickened over it. Flocks of birds burst from the forest all at once and wheeled into the pale sky. For one impossible moment, Rowan thought he saw the ridge split open, and a shape of roots rise above it like antlers or fingers clawing out of a grave. Then mist swallowed the whole horizon. They drifted in silence for a long time. At last Andrea asked, very softly, "Do you think it died?" Rowan looked back at the place where the island had been. Nothing remained but fog and sea. "I do not know." She nodded as though that was the only honest answer. By the time a passing trawler found them, the sun was high and thin behind clouds. The fishermen hauled them aboard and wrapped them in blankets and asked the usual questions. Where had they come from? Was there a wreck? Had others survived? Rowan told them very little. An island, a fire, dead people. Enough truth to be believed, not enough to be understood. No chart showed an island where they had come from. No captain would admit knowledge of such a place. Officials searched, of course. Boats were sent. Maps were checked and rechecked. Reports were filed. Storms were blamed. Coordinates were argued over. Nothing was found. No island, no village, no chapel, no graves. Yet sometimes, months later, in the hours before dawn, Rowan would wake to the smell of wet earth in a room that should have smelled only of coal and dust. He would hear, for just a second, a bell ringing once from very far away. Andrea never spoke of the tunnels again. And once, when Rowan passed her bedroom door late at night, he heard her whispering in her sleep, not praying, answering. Years passed. The wounds closed. Scars paled. Life, with its rude and practical demands, pressed onward as it always does. Meals had to be made. Rent had to be paid. Fires had to be banked against winter. Grief had to become something small enough to carry. But some things never truly leave. One autumn morning, after a week of rain, Rowan found a plant growing in the garden behind his house. He had never seen its like. It stood knee-high with leaves black-green and glossy as fresh liver. Its stem was pale, almost white, lined with faint veins that pulsed when touched. At the top was a single flower, not yet open, swollen and heavy as an eye. He dug it out at once, roots and all. The root bled, not red, amber, thick and shining. He burned it in the stove until the whole house stank of sap and bitterness. For the rest of the day, he said nothing to Andrea. That night, without discussion, they packed what they could carry and left before dawn for another town farther inland. Even there, years later, the dreams continued. A bell, a chamber of roots, a voice from inside the earth whispering, not in pain now, but in patience. Help, or perhaps hunger. So if one winter evening you should find yourself near a coast no one speaks of plainly, and if an old fisherman refuses your money when you name an island that does not exist, take his fear seriously. If you smell fresh turned soil where there should only be salt air, turn back. If you hear singing from beneath your feet, do not wait to understand it. And if you ever come across a flower with white veined stem and leaves dark as bruises, do not touch it with bare skin. Do not keep it. Do not let it seed. Some things survive fire. Some things survive drowning. And some horrors do not need to chase you. They only need a little soil, a little blood and time. That is the story for tonight. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this descent into horror and ruin, stay with the channel for the next tale. Until then, sleep lightly, keep away from lonely shores, and remember that not every prayer is meant to be answered. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of